Welcome back to CloudGenera.com. Hopefully you've had a chance to view our first video and you understand that you can quickly generate your first scorecard in 2 minutes or less using our CloudAssist technology and the global templates. If you haven't already, feel free to take an opportunity to create a free account at CloudGenera.com and follow along with the video in another window. In this example, we want to unpack the first video that we showed you, that 2-minute scorecard generation. Let's take an opportunity now to talk about the inputs that generated that scorecard and the types of analysis that you see at a detailed level down below this executive summary. The first dimension of analysis, or the first set of inputs that we take a look at, is what we call user demographics. Let's make sure that we have the ability to paint the global footprint of where our users may sit who plan to access the services that we're currently modeling. So this is where we can say that we have a certain percentage of users in one country or region of the world and where the other users may sit who plan to access these services. We can talk about the number of seats or the number of people. How many are going to access these services in total and how many concurrently? And then what is their access paradigm? Will these servers be running all the time, constantly? Or will they run periodically? For example, once a day for a period of 9 months out of the year, and an average of 8 hours per day. So after we talk about user demographics, we start to look at service level. The service level section is a vendor agnostic list of capabilities that is translated into the logical equivalent in the provider catalogs that are in scope for the assessment on the scorecard. So for example, if geo-load balancing exists or a logical equivalent that may go by another name, then we're going to call that out once we select this box, and we're going to price that out so you understand the cost of that capability. On the other hand, if geo-load balancing does not exist, we're going to call this out as a gap so you can holistically make a decision that one of the things I said I needed is not available in that provider. Along those same lines, the next dimension of analysis is compliance and privacy. What are the various regulatory concerns that need to be in place so that your business users are comfortable with the state of their application data? We have HIPAA compliance and ISO compliance specified as the two things we want to look at. Let's actually add another one. In this case, we'll add high tech. We want to understand which providers have both HIPAA and high tech compliance, and we'll see that come out on the scorecard. So after we look at user demographics, service level, compliance and privacy, our next dimension of analysis is application design. So this is where we've created a palette based around a concept called tiers, T-I-E-R-S, to allow the user to paint a picture of what their application currently looks like. Each tier is really just a logical grouping of compute, network, and storage resources. And so in each tier, we have the ability to explain how much data flows in and out of that tier, better known as ingress and egress. And these values or requirements will be translated into the cost of network services in each provider that's in scope for the assessment. We can also talk about the definitions of the different resources that we expect to see. Now this pop-up gives us a bird's eye view quickly of the specifications of this compute node, but let's click into it to get a more detailed view. So we can talk about the number of identical nodes in that tier. We can talk about the financial model or the depreciation schedule of that set of machines. We can talk about the hardware resources. So how many virtual CPUs and how many gigs of memory and how many gigabytes of local storage need to be a part of this machine? What is the platform or hypervisor that this runs on? This can be KVM or Hyper-V or x86 or Itanium or whatever the platform is that we're looking for. We can also specify the performance preference. Again, we'll talk about this more in a later video, but the premise is that many cloud providers are tuning or tweaking the performance of the virtual machines that are running in their public or private scenarios to accommodate the needs of your particular application. In addition to the hardware-centric or performance-centric metrics that we can capture, we can also talk about the financial expectations. So what does it cost me to acquire, to maintain, and to operate those parts of the solution for my hardware stack and my software stack? What is my operating system? What about my middleware? What about any other application software that sits on top of this stack? And so the premise is we have the ability to specify our expectations and our cost structure for compute, network, and storage nodes in our application. Now, what you've probably noticed is that we are purposely mixing technological and financial information because CloudGenera makes the point that in a data-driven world, it's very difficult to say that we can save you money tomorrow if we can't say what you're spending today. And that's what we unpack next in our cost summary section. This number represents your top of the house spend or your annualized cost for this application. And then down below, we give you an inverted tree view that you can interact with to understand the breakdown of the cost contained herein. So this just under $266,000 number has a just under 200K component that's capital expense that's broken down this way. In the bottom half of the page, we can also talk about the operating expenses that may be a function of this application. Again, it's just a different level of information than the CFO or CIO may have seen before to allow us to be very specific around what our current cost model is. Now we're finally back to the scorecard. So again, let's unpack this a little bit. So we have the ability to set the scope of our assessment. And in this case, I want to show you how easy it is to change or add other providers into the mix that we want to consider. So let's add Google into the mix here. And we'll see how they perform. We'll swap them out for vCloud Air on Demand. We'll save these settings. We'll hide these settings now that they're set, and we'll regenerate our scorecard. Now we see how Google performs next to AWS and Azure, and this is what we find. When it comes to service level, the blue check for Azure means that Azure meets 100% of our expectations around those requirements. The gray question mark for Amazon Web Services mean that they are between 85 and 99% compliant for those same requirements. And then Google is less than 85% compliant as specified by the red X. Again, we see a bit of a mixed bag for our next round of requirements that we specified here on the padlock around compliance and privacy. Azure met all of our requirements. Amazon and Google were less than 85% compliant with our expectations. And then when it comes to technology, things like hypervisor, platform, other application software, number of CPUs, amount of memory, all three providers have some gaps. They're all less than 85% compliant as specified by the red X. And then finally, the total cost section says that in spite of the gaps, I will save money with all three providers if I deploy this solution to their services. Next, we see the particular scores of how each vendor did with that section of requirements. So AWS met 87% of our service level expectations, for example, where Google met 60. And then we get to our total cost of ownership analysis section, which compares the cost to replicate this application and the corresponding requirements in that cloud provider versus our BYO or build your own costs listed here that we borrow from our cost summary section. The final section of the scorecard is where we essentially give you a bill of materials to specify exactly what you would provision in each of those providers. So for users who've ever wondered, how do I rationalize an A6 in Azure versus an M4 extra large in Amazon, or for that matter, the other materials that I would need to consume in that cloud, we give you the compute, the storage, the network nodes, and the network services. We also give you the soft costs or the carryover costs, and then we also give you the items that are missing. In the example we talked about back on the padlock around our regulatory concerns, we wanted to understand who was high-tech compliant. In this case, we see that Azure is the only provider that actually has high-tech compliance. That, ladies and gentlemen, brings us to the end of this video. Come back to CloudGenera.com or consider creating a trial account to follow along with our next video. Thank you.